Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, good, thank you. Well, I'm very excited about today's topic. It's going to be on globalism, which some people don't even think is a real thing. But I do, and I think it's there's just a lot going on with attempts at global governance right now, and I think it's an important issue to discuss, especially as it relates to Ayn Rand fandom.
Right. And in light of the recent G7 summit in France and the upcoming NATO summit in Turkey, we thought this was a good time to do an episode on globalism. It is a controversial idea. Some people, like you said, don't even think it's real, think it's an anti-concept out to destroy other ideas. Um, and we wanted to explore this idea because some other people think it's real and should be um, a real philosophy that you follow and try to enact around the world. So we're going to use some clips from world leaders and diplomats and look at some clips from Objectivists from the Ayn Rand Institute talking about this issue. But first, I think we want to ask in general, just what is globalism? We want to define our terms and maybe differentiate it from another idea called globalization. Um, did you want to begin this part, Scott, or do you want me to go into it?
Well, I think I'll have more to say on it. I generally see globalism as the attempt to create one world government under a kind of progressive, liberal, Fabian socialist worldview. So,
Yeah, that's generally my take. I went to my dictionary. I have an old dictionary from 2002, college American Heritage College Dictionary, and I looked up globalism, and basically it used to mean um, just a foreign policy of international intervention and commitment to global affairs in opposition to like isolationism. Um, so it's basically the opposite of what George Washington warned us about getting entangled in foreign affairs. It's the idea of getting entangled in foreign affairs and trying to form um, the policy of uniting the whole world under one sort of governance. And this came about in World War II, I guess, because World War II was such a global event, global conflict, that people really started thinking about the idea of ruling the world under one banner. Um, and then later on, it started to include like corporations or um, world, like free market capitalism. And I think at that point, when they started interjecting free market capitalism into the mix, that's really when it became uh, an anti-concept or package deal or something that is not good. It's not, there's no like good part of it because what's happening is it's undermining the idea of capitalism and free markets by promoting trade with countries that aren't free markets. It's like saying we should trade with China no matter what China is or no matter what China does. It could be like this dictatorship and with slaves working in their economy, and we'll still treat this as international free trade or aim for it by including them in the world governance. And I think that's a mistake. I think this globalism is an attempt to destroy the idea of capitalism, and it's a vicious, malicious um, philosophy.
or the people that are doing it are using capitalism, like when Liz Warren or Bernie Sanders say they're capitalists to hide that their plans are for global governance. But you brought up isolationism. I think it might be useful to go into some of what Rand said about isolationism and different global entities.
Yeah, so Rand talked about
Hey,
isolationism.
I'm just cutting in for a moment. You're getting away from your microphone and it's soft every so often.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
So, sorry, let me begin again. So Ayn Rand talked about isolationism in her Art of Smearing, or The Art of Smearing and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. And she said that there was a large, quote, a large scale instance in the 1930s was the introduction, or a large scale of political smear tactics was the introduction of the word isolationism into our political vocabulary. It was a derogatory term suggesting something evil, and it had no clear, explicit definition. It was used to convey two meanings, one alleged, the other real, and to damn both. So the meaning that they were damning was patriotism and national self-interest. Um, and so back then, it's weird that these two terms, isolationism and globalism, came about within a couple decades of each other. And I think they're both attempts to destroy real good ideas like patriotism and capitalism. And they mean generally opposite things, right? Isolationism is a smear against people who are interested in your national self-interest or concerned with national self-interest and want to maintain the nation. And then globalism is a smear against capitalism, saying we should just you keep treat everybody as equal trade partners, even if it's China or socialist countries who want to take advantage of us. So that's basically, I think she was against this whole idea of creating this false dichotomy of isolationism or globalism. Now, I couldn't find very many instances where she even referred to anything like globalism, but it's pretty clear that I think she would have been against it because she was against this whole idea of communism, which I think is what globalism has become. Like communism was defeated essentially, and so now it's turned into this globalism type idea. It's the same thing. You want one world government. You know, communists wanted to rule the world under the banner of communism. Now they just want to call it globalism and sneak in their socialism.
Yeah, they'll be much nicer this time. Yeah, but I do think that she was famously an isolationist herself before the US got into World War II. I don't mean that in a bad way, it's just she was against us going into war, and so that's the term. But and I'm sure that affected some of why she didn't like it. But yes, it was after World War II that I think attempts to have this global governance. They thought, oh, it's because the US wasn't in the League of Nations. That's why World War II started, or whatever narratives that they talked about. But I have this quote from her in 1962. She wrote to young scientists, and she says, capitalism does not force individuals or nations into the collectivist slave pen of a world government. The so-called one world is merely, quote, one neck ready for one leash. So, there were attempts at world government. Like you said, the communists, I mean, that was just part of their mission. They sometimes use the term internationalism. And, but this one world came about right after World War II, and some of it evolved into the World Economic Foundation. So, this is something she was warning about. And so obviously global governance is something that's been going on. You could argue that it's been happening for years. It just, as international diplomacy was going on as early as, maybe the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, or even the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763. But there have been just attempts at, like you said, of trying to stop these issues from happening. And I think as America got so big, it was like global governance and making the decisions that affected other people just became part of the issue. Now, Rand definitely did not like the UN and their approach to governing. She wrote in the Shanghai Gesture in 1971, the expulsion of a charter member, the Republic of China, meaning Taiwan, an action forbidden by the UN's own charter, was a moment of truth, a naked display of the United Nations soul. What was Red China's qualification for membership in the UN? The fact that her government seized power by force and has maintained it for 22 years by terror? What disqualified nationalist China? The fact that she was a friend of the United States. So she sees that, the UN is just in this process of putting the worst actors in positions of power at the expense of the better actors. And she's right to call it out and to say that it should be countered.
Well, she clearly saw this attempt for one world government, like at the United Nations, as a collectivist entity, and she famously talked about there being no positive when you join with collectivists. Like there's no benefit for you. So she was very much interested in America's national self-interest, and she saw, like you said, she didn't think we should get into World War II because it wasn't in our national self-interest. Likewise, we shouldn't get involved in the United Nations because it's this collectivist entity that'll kick out countries like Taiwan, and it's not interested in uh, becoming the hero to these free market capitalist nations, because its primary goal is to leech off of them. It's socialists and collectivists forming this one world government in order to control the free capitalist nations of the world. It's an attempt to take power, by uniting the nations against countries like America. So, of course, they have to include America in the United Nations. Otherwise, they can't exert control over us. So somehow they got to entice us into this this body of nations, and I think it's a terrible thing we've done. We need to get out of the United Nations. It's a blight on our civilization, and I don't know how else to put it. It's the worst
Yeah,
thing we could possibly do in foreign relations.
there was an old bumper sticker: "Get the U.S. out of the UN, get the UN out of the U.S." I agree with that sentiment, but I do want to shift over to what some people have said about globalism and globalization. Yaron Brook of the Ayn Rand Institute, for his part, he warns people not to confuse globalization with globalism, which he claims is an anti-concept.
Don't confuse globalization with globalism. Globalism is an anti-concept. There is no such thing as globalism. Globalism is a mixture of globalization, which is free trade, free movement of capital, free movement of people, with one world government. But nobody who is actually an advocate of real globalization, of capitalism, believes in one world government. One world government is a bogeyman. It's a bogeyman. Globalism is not a concept. It's an anti-concept. And every time you do it, you undermine your own thinking. Anytime you use it, you undermine your own thinking. And you undermine the case for liberty. Because you undermine the case for free trade. You undermine the case for globalization. You undermine the case for freedom. But there is no such thing as globalism. It doesn't exist. There's one world government, and I don't know anybody, or I know very few people who are not against one world government. There are very few people who believe in one world government. And it's just, that's not the issue on the table. Even the Great Reset is not primarily about one world government. It's about one set of policies that all governments, independent governments, should adopt.
He seems to want to govern our word choice as a means of ignoring global governance. I mean, I love the whole, accept my conceptual boundary or you're helping to destroy freedom. And it just, even the Great Reset were the technocrats that wanted to use COVID to impose rules on all of us. And Yaron was like, oh, that's not global governance. They just wanted policies that all independent governments had to adopt. I mean, that's what we're talking about with global governance. If they have to adopt policies, how independent are those governments anyway?
Well, he does seem to be overblowing the issue. Um, he's saying that globalism doesn't exist. Well, it exists as an anti-concept.
I don't
So I
think it's
mean,
an anti-concept. We need a word that is for people that want to, take over that want to run the world for global governance. He claims that it's a boogeyman, no one believes it, or very few people believe it. But the people who do believe it are in many cases these, politicians and the political class around the world.
yeah, and then he overblows the issue of whether it exists, and then he undermines the idea of there being globalists, of people out there who actually believe in this. Because if you say it doesn't exist, like globalism doesn't exist, then clearly there can't be globalists, right? So it's a form of rationalism. He begins with this idea that it doesn't exist, so then there can't be people who are globalists. But the truth is, it exists as an anti-concept, and so people can try to follow it. There can be confused, mixed people trying to do this.
Why does he
And
just get to declare what's an anti-concept? I mean, I'm referring to something specific with it. He kind of did the same thing with cancel culture. He's like, it's not a real thing. And
yeah,
he does. We did a whole show on threats and the way he's often just dismissive of things he doesn't want to deal with.
yeah. So obviously, well, my take is that it's just a replacement term for socialism or communism, and um, and so I guess he doesn't see that, or he doesn't think that, or believe it. So, but if you see it as this anti-concept that's really trying to get rid of capitalism and replace it with socialism, then there are socialists in the world who are using this term. They want globalism around the world, but they want a socialist form of it. They don't really want free. What they think is free trade is unfair trade or fraudulent trade with countries like China. So they want just to treat all the nations as equals economically and politically, morally. And another thing that I don't like about what Yaron was saying is that he thinks that globalization is the good term. Like it just means spreading capitalism around the world. But that's not what it means. It means spreading globalist ideas around the world. It just means globalizing the world. Globalization is just the noun form of globalize. And so you can say there's a free trade globalization. So, but there's also socialist globalization. There's all kinds of different things you can try to spread around the world. Slavery, trafficking little girls. There's all sorts of things that can be globalized. So it's not a great replacement term, to say we should start using globalization. You need to define your terms, define your concepts, and maybe we don't want to spend our days trying to spread free trade to China. Maybe we should have an economic boycott against China and rid them from the civilized world.
Well, I would like to play a couple of clips of some foreign leaders and that have spoken out about globalism or global governance. First is a clip from Canadian Prime Minister Carney last month stating that the international order will be rebuilt out of Europe.
It's my strong personal view that as the international order will be rebuilt, but it will be rebuilt out of Europe. And so I'm very appreciative of the symbolism of this invitation. Thank you.
Maybe you can explain a little of the context there.
Yeah, I think it's not much context on purpose. It's about the Social Democrats in Canada, the EU, the Democrats, even Bush-Cheney Republicans. I mean, George Bush Sr. was talking about the New World Order as soon as the Berlin Wall fell. So it's the Euro-US political class. They thought it was their job to make global decisions. And so, he's talking about how Trump has basically messed up their plans to rule the world. And they're planning to come back after Trump is gone and rebuild, their socialist political class out of Europe and hope they can get a Democrat president to start barking orders at that'll go along with it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like this is a reaction to Trump exerting America's national self-interest again. Even though we might disagree a little bit with Trump on the way he's doing it, he is trying to exert some nationalism, the good form of nationalism, and American patriotism again in our foreign policy. And so this is him saying we can't rely on America to help us with the one world order. Now we need to look to Europe. And this is coming from the Canadian Prime Minister.
They're basically part of Europe anyway.
Yeah, they grew out of Britain, so they're very close to Europe, and so now they're going to look to Europe for their help. They're a basically socialist country, and they're going to look to socialist Europe for assistance. I think that, and we got to remember, this is not a free country. Jordan Peterson had to flee from Canada because of the speech censorship.
Remember those truckers during COVID?
Yeah.
Shut down their bank accounts.
They don't have the Bill of Rights. They don't have a constitutional rights like we do in America. So a lot of Canadians are fearful. I watch some Canadian podcasters who have to censor their speech because they're worried they'll get locked up. That's going on in Europe as well. In Britain, people are getting locked up because of what they say on the internet. So this is a problem. And if you think that they have free trade or they should be, involved in international free trade, that's a problem as well, because, they have all kinds of protectionist regulations. And, it's not just America who tries to protect herself in international trade. It's all around the world. But it's worse in places like China, where they actually don't have any rights, at all.
Yeah, and speaking of China, in case the Carney clip wasn't enough, China's foreign minister spoke recently about Xi's global governance initiative that he came out with last year, and says one of the most important parts is keeping the UN as global leaders.
The most explicit message of the GGI is that the leading status of the UN must be upheld, not challenged. The central role of the UN must be strengthened, not weakened. The UN is not perfect, but without the UN, the world would only be worse. Creating parallel structures outside the UN, or worse still, putting together various exclusive blocs and circles, is unpopular and unsustainable. The most unequivocal requirement of the GGI is that the UN must keep pace with the times, improve its governance system through reform, and adapt to the evolving international situation and the changing dynamics in the global balance of power in the 21st century. In particular, it should increase the voice and representation of countries of the Global South and better reflect the legitimate demands of developing countries.
Notice all the buzzwords in that speech: a global balance of power, developing countries. It's all about giving more power, shifting the balance in favor of the weaker nations.
It's global, communism. The stronger nations have to give. But I mean, China is basically, they often control brutally countries in like Africa, where they become hated and feared in several countries. But I think it's notable, China realizes Trump is trying to go around the UN, and China has more power there as a permanent member, and they know they have functional diplomatic control of, obviously, if they want that to be the issue. But, they say they don't like outside blocks. BRICS is an outside block. They don't mind their parallel institutions.
Yeah. So there's a little contradiction in their philosophy there, but that's to be expected. When you're dealing with these evil regimes, they're not going to play by any fair rules. They're going to cheat and steal. One of our big problems is them stealing intellectual property. So this is a real problem when you start making deals with collectivists. And this is a problem that Trump is facing now with Iran. I always mispronounce it, apparently. But with Iran, you can't make deals. And so I was really in favor of what Trump was doing when he was out to destroy the leadership of Iran and just bombing the heck out of them, saying he's going to get them to their knees and surrender. I mean, this is all good talk, and he kind of backed it up with some weapons, and bombing and stuff. But now he's trying to make a deal, and I don't think it's not going to work.
I don't think he's being, straightforward about what his goal is. We talked about this during the Iran episode. I think he wants control of the Strait of Hormuz to have his own off switch for China if they do anything.
I don't know what he's doing. I don't see the plan here. I think he's kowtowing to international pressure. And this is part of what the UN does, is it puts pressure on countries like America to bow to the demands of the developing countries. And Iran is certainly a developing country. They want to develop into a nuclear power. And Trump is trying to stop that, right? So he's at odds with one of the primary goals of Iran, is to become this powerful nation. And we don't want them to have power because they're a religious dictatorship who's out to kill Christians and Jews and whoever else they don't like.
We'll see how that shakes out. I just think that the lesson is for all those people calling globalists boogeyman, or that, hardly anyone's for global governance. Well, the problem is the leader of China is for global governance, the largest country and most communist country in the world. And, Yaron dismisses them by saying, oh, no, they're not communist. That's fascist. It's like anything where he doesn't have to line himself up against a big fight against the left. And
sorry, I got to interject that once again, that's because of his rationalism. You can't escape from irrationalism until you become objective about your ideas. Like, he will ignore all the evidence in the world that there are globalists like China. As long as he maintains this idea that globalism is a myth, there's no such thing as globalism, and so therefore there can't be globalists.
I agree. And just to bring it slightly closer to home, I don't have video for this one, but Graham Plattner, the far left candidate with a Nazi tattoo for Senate in Maine that was endorsed by Bernie Sanders, they've talked about America must lead the charge for global minimum tax to break this chain of dominance and ensure that extreme wealth is finally reinvested in the public good. And they've talked about using laws on the books basically to by using international diplomacy to identify and target concentrated wealth, we can coordinate taxes and sanctions on ultra-wealthy individuals, especially those tied to authoritarian regimes, rather than relying on broad trade sanctions that harm ordinary people. And so they've already passed like a wealth tax in places like California, and they see these billionaires rightfully leaving to protect themselves. And now they're like, oh, well, what we need to do is form global rules where they're going to get taxed no matter what country they move to. That's global rules and global norms and what China refers to as the global rule of law. And it's really just, targeting the ultra wealthy. I mean, I thought that should be considered a little bit of a threat, at least if you're an Ayn Rand fan and like billionaires and value they provide.
Yeah, you see the animosity toward wealthy people. It's a pretty barefaced attempt at like this altruistic idea of making the wealthy sacrifice for the poor. The only redeeming quality in that statement you read is that he says this, we should consider this especially for those tied to authoritarian regimes. Like we're going to go after
He just threw that in there. They want the bread and butter more than they want the authoritarians.
Right. You can see how he's appealing to some sense of morality here. He's saying, look, I want to tax the super wealthy, but let's especially go after the evil wealthy, the ones who are wealthy, in authoritarian regimes and getting wealthy off the backs of slaves. So, but
he
that's
thinks he's
just
being moral about the whole thing.
But you can see there how sneaky they are, how they try to weasel in your mind, weasel into your mind and make you think, well, they're good because they really just are going after the bad people. But when they get their rules and regulations in place, it's just going to be a slaughter on the ultra wealthy across the board.
Yeah. And, I just, as these people, he's possibly going to be the next senator from Maine. And, but we're still being told that, oh, no one wants global governance or attempts to use these laws to put taxes on billionaires it's messing with the sovereignty of these individuals because they can't move their money freely where they need to. I want to switch gears a little bit here because there was a Harry Binswanger article that kicked some of this off, and he was writing more about globalization, and it seemed to upset some people. I'm just going to quote a couple of comments that he made that I think are really relevant. He starts with angry articles about immigration have flared up again among objectivists, but both sides seem to have no difficulty ignoring the points I made. Or more benevolently, which I have not done enough to publicize and explain. So he's subtly accusing Peikoff of evasion before backing off. I mean, who else has been, immigration? It was that Peikoff essay that he's referring to, unless he's just talking about some random person, which I highly doubt. In this next one, he says, globalization is here and cannot be stopped. With cheap and easy transportation around the globe, unless a country walls itself off like North Korea with similar meaning and consequences, the differences in race and culture of 100 years ago are going to melt away. So I do think the world is unifying, but I'd rather push for a United States of the world where they adopt our standards, than that our culture is going to melt away. And if globalization is really just about trade, I mean, why bring up everything about race and culture? It doesn't necessarily have to change that. But I mean, he's using globalization to imply much broader things.
Yeah, he's actually using what I think is a valid concept of globalization, which is that you can't separate the economy from everything else, like politics or morality. It's all integrated. And once you try to exert your own moral system or values around the world, then you're going to need a government to enforce those values, to protect them. You can't have people violating your morality. They need to be imprisoned or punished if they kill people or steal or whatever. So part of globalizing the free trade is also globalizing your own values, your morality, your ethical system, and that's kind of your culture, right? And that's what Harry's recognizing here implicitly or perhaps explicitly here. He's saying that I want all the races and cultures to melt away, and I want the good culture and race to prevail. So I don't know what race he wants to prevail. Like all the races will melt away except one. Like
Well,
what's going to be the superior race, Harry? Like I don't know.
and he does go into that, what goes into the mixing process generally are the best elements of each culture, or so it seems to me, and it makes sense. Why would people of culture B value the things about culture A that are objectively inferior? I mean, sometimes it's because of guilt or whatever. And then here, Harry continues, here I'm taking culture in a perceptual level sense. How people look, what foods they eat, their mode of dress, not in Ayn Rand's deep sense of the sum of the intellectual achievements of individual men, which their fellow citizens have accepted. I'm talking about regional differences in optional life ways. Oh, so he can use a different definition of a term when it suits him. But we're being told what terms we can use, what we can't. Maybe I'm using globalism in a different way than they are.
Well, I mean, he's got his own idea, and Yaron has his own idea. They're two different people. So, but I think what Harry's doing is a problem there. At the last thing you quoted, he was talking about there being a difference between the perceptual level culture and then the deep intellectual side of culture. He's trying to like create this dichotomy here, where you can have globalized, superficial race perceptual level culture, and that will all melt away, and you'll have one unified globalized race and culture. But then somehow he's not going to have that when it comes to the intellect, or the ideas. So how do you separate those two? I mean, that's an awful dichotomy to envision. And it's not going to happen because that's not how reality works.
He says it can't be stopped with just a whiff of determinism.
Yeah, so like what's going to happen? We're going to have this intellectual movement. Let's imagine that the good ideas prevail, and then so that results in the melting away of all races. How does that work? The melting away of all cultures? Like cultures don't involve the ideas. So if you think that the ideas say that American cultures is dominant, is superior, then what's he saying? We're going to have American culture spreads around the world. And so then everyone will be this blend of American races. What's going to happen? Is that
I
what
used to
saying?
believe that until I saw terrorists fly planes into buildings after living among us for years.
It's as if there are not billions of people in the world with different races and religions and cultures going on. Like there's always going to be an antagonist. I mean, what we've learned through human history is that we divide and conquer. Like we divide first, okay, and then we try to conquer. So even if we somewhat achieve a one world culture and nation, it's ultimately going to divide because people are going to have different ideas. They're going to clash. There's going to be the orthodoxy and the reform movement. Okay, it's always going to progress. And he doesn't realize that.
Well, this next one, he says, the danger to America comes not from a handful of terrorists crossing the border, but from the millions of university graduates crossing from academia into actual America. Yeah, they come out of academia pushing a left-wing agenda, which Harry then votes for. So, and then this one really gets me. Immigrant crime, he says, this is a problem, but how big a problem? The number of crimes committed by American citizens is, of course, many times greater than the MAGA spotlighted crimes by immigrants. There are 14 times as many citizens as non-citizens. That's a very odd presentation. I don't know if it sounds deceptive to anyone else, but it's the per capita basis that would be relevant to compare. I mean, I looked it up and those stats aren't available, but it's like, he's just like, who needs data? Of course, citizens commit more crimes. They're 14 times the number of non-citizens.
He gets into a lot of particulars to try to justify his position on immigration. And some of his stats are probably correct. But this is avoiding the issue. He's distracting us, trying to distract us from the real issue, which is that we need to control our border for all sorts of different reasons, not just immigration. We need to control our borders so we know who's coming in to visit, just to come here and see Disneyland.
This last quote, he says, against that backdrop, how big a problem in your life is crime? Now make it, how big a problem is crime by an immigrant? Now make it crime by an immigrant who could have been kept out by a good vetting process at the border. Now, isn't he famous for being against vetting, that crossing the border between countries should be like crossing a state line? Again, it comes off as deceptive to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure what his immigration stance has to do with globalization, other than he wants to allow everyone into the country. So I guess this is how we'll mix together, just get rid of borders and then we'll all be mixed together and all culture will melt away. But this is
like
just
this 90s moderate take that, we're all just gonna sing Kumbaya and everyone's going to learn to love American values. And
he doesn't need to convince us that there are good immigrants. That's not the issue. The issue is that he's living in a fairy tale land. It's a fantasy of having open borders. It's not going to happen because we have nations, and we have nations exist for a reason, because people are different. And regions are different. Regions of the world are different, and environments are different. That's why we have different states, because you need regional governments to deal with local issues.
Well, I do want to switch gears to what some of the other scholars at the Ayn Rand Institute have said. Ben Baer in 2019 called globalism a package deal.
Globalism is one of these package deals that she would have criticized. It groups together, on the one hand, international free trade, which, for reasons we've discussed today, individualists should be pretty happy about. But then also a whole elaborate set of global governmental organizations and institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, which in fact does cause all kinds of economic dislocations around the world. And the effect of the term globalism, the way that it's usually used, is to end up impugning the benefits of free trade by guilt by association with the detriments of these global governmental organizations. And I urge people not to use that term globalism. Talk about international free trade, talk about international governmental organizations, but those are very different things, even though they both happen to be something that happens around the world. And that's just a superficial similarity.
Well, I tend to agree with Ben there that we should reject the term globalism. I think there are negative aspects to it, and we don't need it. It's just like like I don't want to be called a communist. I don't want to be called a globalist. So I don't think we should use the term.
They're too focused on what terms to use. I need a term for when, Fabian socialists and these global leaders try to take over. I mean, there is a problem with global governance. Lots of people call it globalism. They're like, oh, but they mean free trade. No, Ben and Yaron mean free trade with globalization. I'm not saying they can't use that term, but don't tell us we can't have a word for attempts at global governance under the guise of liberal social democracy.
But we already have a term for global governance. It's called communism. So my problem with using globalism is not exactly what Ben was saying. It's that you're not using the right term. You're accepting their term for themselves. They're trying to hide behind the term globalism. They are
I don't mean it
socialists.
in a positive way.
I know, but there's a more accurate term for them. And so because there's a bad connotation now around socialism and communism, they want to be called globalists. And I think if you accept that new term, you're helping them hide behind that term.
I mean, I don't, maybe for objectivist audiences, because that's really who they're trying to say to objectivist audiences not to use the term. I mean, I've used it. I used it before. I heard other people say I can't. And it's just like cancel culture. I'm just not going to let these people dictate to me what terms I use. If I'm using globalist, because a lot of these people, you call them a communist and they're like, we're not communists. We're for free markets. And but in fact, yes, you're basically right. And so we're using globalism to say you're trying to erode America's sovereignty for your social democrat goals, and you shouldn't be doing it. And if I have to use global governance, I mean, it has a couple more syllables, but I'm not giving up the word just because they say to. We've got another example of Greg Salmieri in 2020 making distinctions between globalism and nationalism.
The issue is nationalism versus globalism, or what used to be called nationalism versus internationalism, which incidentally is a package deal that Rand wrote about in the Ayn Rand column. These are package deals. So
just spell out what you mean.
There's no, having to do with a nation versus having to do with the whole globe. There are a million different types of having to do with. Some things should have to do with everyone everywhere, and some things should have to do with a nation. So it's a good thing that there are different nations. We shouldn't all be under one world government or no governments at all in some kind of international anarchy. But there are certain things that national governments are good for and keeping nations distinct are good for, and others not. So we have laws. We have different laws in different countries. The country is here to protect the rights of the people in its country. They can form military alliances, and we use the military to protect one country from another. We have regions where we know where the jurisdiction ends and so forth. And all of that is done nation by nation, and it's right that it be done nation by nation. But who you can buy rice from shouldn't be that kind of thing. There's no reason why I should buy rice from a guy in South Carolina rather than a guy in China, and vice versa, the Chinese guy buying rice from America or somewhere else. So to the particular things that are being packaged out today is trade, movement of people, and who has governmental sovereignty. And these are being packaged together as, are you a globalist? You think all of these things should be internationalized all around the world and you don't believe in countries at all? Or are you a nationalist who thinks we should each be a tribe that trades only with itself, that doesn't, or views our trade relations with other countries as some kind of pseudo-war because you're an anti-conceptual mentality?
So there are some things in there that I agree with. I think he does a decent job of explaining, the difference between globalism and nationalism, except I don't agree with the idea that a free country should be, there are no reasons you should not trade with a guy selling rice in China. He's saying you should be free to trade with the rice seller in China. I think that's an attempt to, or actually an acceptance of the globalist idea that we're all equal nations and there should be this unification of the nations. It's a small acceptance. It's not like the full acceptance, because in theory, he he says he rejects the ideas of globalism, but in practice, he actually accepts some of it when it comes to trade. And I think that that's a split or a dichotomy between ethics and politics, political economic systems. So I don't think you should separate those things or disintegrate them. You need to integrate your ethical system with your political economic system. And so we should be advocating an economic boycott against China, not free trade with China, this fake free trade with China. It's pseudo trade. It's not real free trade.
Well, and they believe that, it's best to, have free open trade just one way, where China gets to sell us all their stuff, even if their people can't buy our North Carolina rice or whatever it is. To me, the issue is he's even less willing to state clearly the global governance factor. He's very dismissing it. Even at the end, he's like, oh, who has government sovereignty? They're evading that the U.S. has been giving up sovereignty to global institutions for 25 years. I mean, there's, even though they haven't signed on to the International Criminal Court officially, they've kind of worked with it in specific instances. And I mean, they've put out arrest warrants for Netanyahu, and it'll probably be Trump eventually. And who knows, Graham Plattner might encourage, us to fully join and help them arrest Trump. They can finally get him on globalist lawfare.
I don't know if Greg's evading that. I mean, it just didn't come up in his talk there. I mean, he's saying that the one thing I like about what he was saying is that there are national interests. And so that's a valid thing to have, is to have nations. So he's fully on board with having nations, and then, not, giving away your national self-interest to the world, to include the whole world in what's going on in your nation.
I just think they're ultimately paying lip service to it, especially if they, see China as just a regular free trading partner with no restrictions on its part. I mean, what do they have to say about China's global governance initiative?
Well, I know that's my one criticism in what Greg was saying. I think that's the flaw, the chink in their armor, is that they don't integrate their moral system and their national self-interest with trade. They call it free trade, but China doesn't have free trade. China is not a free trade partner with us. They are cheats. They are thieves. They use slaves. Slave labor. They're commies. You don't call that free trade and expect to get away with it. It's internet. You can call it international trade. I don't even know if it's properly called trade. It's something else.
It's not the free market.
It's
there may be elements
exchange.
of, China's favored sellers may be able to sell here.
It's exchanging goods. I don't know if you can call it free exchange of goods, but it's some sort of slave trade. Slaves. It's a trade on slave labor. That's what it is.
You have to have, a Chinese politician that's, has a stake in the company for you to get through the red tape, is the way I hear that it goes. But there's also one other clip we have with Nikos talking to Ben on how the left was anti-globalist 25 years ago, but now they've become globalist, and Trump is the anti-globalist.
You mentioned the reaction to globalism. And it's very important for anyone who wants to take ideas seriously to understand that this was literally the agenda of the left 20 years ago. The anti-globalization movement was the big comeback of the global left in the international stage, in the international arena. So if you remember, they were following the G8 or the what people today call globalists around in Genoa, in Seattle, and they were doing all these protests claiming that globalization is bad for the working class. And of course, people back then on the right it's one topic they got right. They were saying, you people are completely economically illiterate. Globalization is, protectionism is bad. Protectionism is bad for the local working class, and protectionism doesn't work and doesn't help anyone. And in the year 2024, we see the Republican Party adopting the agenda of the anti-globalization left. I want the audience who is going to think, oh, why are these people criticizing Trump? Are they leftist? No, if you think this, you are the leftist who have adopted the agenda of the anti-globalization left.
I think that Nikos is conflating or confusing different issues. I think the anti-globalist left, they were more focused on labor issues, I think. And nowadays, the anti-globalist right seems more interested in national interest and culture and immigration. I mean, there's different issues going on here because globalization is a wide, broad concept that can refer to all kinds of different things. And so I think what Nikos is trying to do is claim that it's this one thing, and like the right has adopted what the left was saying before, but I don't think that's really the case. I think it's a different issue. It's a different thing going on. And so you can be an anti-globalist for various reasons. Just like, you can be against religion on the left and the right for various reasons. Like objectivists might be against religion, but we're not the same type of anti-religionist as a communist. You can be against it for different reasons. And especially when it relates to foreign policy, there's all kinds of various factors because you're dealing with different nations, different cultures all around the world, different types of people.
I remember the WTO protests around 2000, and that did happen. But since Obama came to power, it's like the Democrats have disciplined their own shock troops into understanding that they're the ones making the global rules now. And so now, because the left is taking control of these institutions, we're supposed to hold some out of context principle that, we can't ever be against globalism no matter who's running the show.
A thought occurred to me that you can have a valid attack against globalism or globalization. And so why shouldn't the right adopt a valid attack? If the left comes up with something valid, why shouldn't the right adopt it? It's valid.
We have to stay frozen in our view from 20 years ago when the left was attacking globalism. And yes, they were probably attacking more globalization and trade. And it's, it's kind of a stereotype. They just assume that we're doing it for some national identity or race-based thing. And it just, no, it's that we actually see these socialists coming and trying to control these global institutions. I just feel like these ARI people, all they do is punch right, at least partially to ignore that they should be standing up to global leftist control of institutions. But, that won't make them any friends on the left.
They do seem to exert this sort of anti-right orientation in their mentality. They have a tendency to go after the right no matter what, and sometimes apologize for the left or even adopt leftist ideas. So I think
it's part of why they don't want to acknowledge globalism as a real thing.
Yeah, and it might come from their adoption of the dim hypothesis, Leonard Peikoff's theory that the right is the real enemy and the long-term threat is going to come from the right.
Even though Peikoff doesn't believe that.
The religious right, yeah, even though Peikoff seems to have, rejected his own theory, they have not, ARI has not rejected that. They've really embraced it. And to some extent, Ayn Rand was also on board with this, saying that, at least within the right, it's the religious element that's the threat. So she was
Things change over time, over 60, 70 years. I believe we've lived through a change where, yes, religion was the dominant social hierarchy, and then it became this kind of socialism, whatever, progressivism, whatever you want to call it. But that is running the institutions in this country and globally and affecting things. It was the WEF pushing things like DEI and ESG. And I would not throw out the concept of globalism. I would just define it properly. It's the attempt to move political power above our constitutional government. And then they disguise that transfer of power as either international norms, global standards, rules-based order, even trade harmonization.
Well, so let me refine what I was saying. I don't think you should throw out the term globalism. I just think you shouldn't adopt it and think that it's like this valid idea, just like you shouldn't adopt communism and think it's a valid idea. So if you're using,
I can still use the word.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of words I don't adopt that you can use. Like, I don't consider myself a racist, but you can use the word racist to describe something real. I think globalism and globalist and globalization, they describe something that's real, but I think they also describe something that's bad, malicious. And I think, especially in the case of globalism, I think it's trying to destroy capitalism. It's trying to destroy free trade. And
their attitude is don't use the term to save capitalism. And I'm saying, yeah, use the term and then say that it's against capitalism, like you're saying. I agree with that.
So if you properly use the term to describe these sorts of evil people, then yeah, that's fine. I mean, I do that. So, but I would more pointedly call them socialists, or, international communists, because that's what they are. I mean, they're trying to camouflage themselves as free trade lovers, because they know that's what we like, and if they say free trade, we're going to jump and give them 3 cheers because we like free trade. Oh, you're a free trade guy, but really they are an evil person in disguise. It's their camouflage.
Like trade is a Trojan horse.
Right. That's a good example. It's like the Greeks giving the Trojans a horse and saying, look, here's a gift for you, but then the gift is your destruction. So that's a really good analogy there.
I'd like to just bring up, the World Cup's going on right now, bringing us together globally. There's been a lot of great stories about people that have been, they call it America pilled by being here and like loving the food. One thing they've also talked about recently is the AC and how AC is like such a part of America that we take for granted, but it's difficult in Europe. And in fact, I saw an article from yesterday in the Telegraph that I think is an example of policies they'd like to coordinate. Homeowners are being forced to tear out air conditioning from their private properties under climate laws, despite rising temperatures. Council planning officers ordered residents to remove air conditioning units over fears they produce too much carbon dioxide, stating they should only be used as a last resort. The net zero clampdown is part of building regulations that state active cooling should only ever be allowed when all other means of passive cooling, such as opening windows or using fans, have been exhausted. It's like the hoops the medical providers make you jump through. We need you to fail on 2 or 3 medications before we approve you for this. And it's just like, no, we need you to really, in I think Switzerland, I heard they make you get a doctor's note for air conditioning. I mean, is that the kind of system where we're more like the rest of the world and we adopt these net zero clampdowns? Oh, no, they can't do the net zero clampdowns because that's not part of globalization. Well, it is a part of globalism.
Well, yeah, that's environmentalism, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's still like nobody is like saying, okay, this is just about trade. We're not going to try to shove our environmental rules on you or anything else we feel like.
Well, environmentalism is a big one. That's obviously a global agenda. The environmentalists are crazy, anti-industrialists, as Ayn Rand pointed out. And so if you're for free trade, you can't be for environmentalism, because environmentalism is an authoritarian system, is an authoritarian philosophy that wants to govern by force and force everyone into this primitive state where you can't use air conditioning anymore without a doctor's note. You know, it's heavy regulation of the economy. It's going to cause all sorts of problems. And I think its main aim is at powerful nations like America, which rely on industry. So it's a way of equalizing the nations, multiculturalism, multinationalism. You know, that it's
our
communism.
Buildings are too cool compared to the others. The only way for it to work is for us to give up our air conditioning so we can harmonize our temperatures.
Well, we need to learn how to be primitive again, because there are primitives around the world who don't have air conditioning, and so it's unfair that we have air conditioning. We're causing environmental problems with the CO2, putting holes in the ozone. I don't even know if they believe that anymore. Do they believe in holes in the ozone anymore? I don't know.
I think they think that was solved or something. That was one of their big wins. But yeah, it's ridiculous. And, you know, there's just these objectivists that are kind of going along with it without even meaning to, because they're the ones going along with the package deal. These people that are talking about globalization and trade and, you know, you get the climate restrictions for free.
Well, it's all a package deal. You know, that's, you know, what the one thing I agree with that Ben was saying and what Yaron was saying is it is a package deal. They lump in all these things with free trade because they know we like the word free trade. And so, you know, like if you put cake frosting on a bottle of poison, it's still a bottle of poison. You know, you may guzzle it all down because it tastes like icing on the cake, but you're going to kill yourself. So
it's enough to make some suckers in the liberty movement drink it.
Yeah, because they like free trade. You know, the rhetoric is powerful. You know, the rhetoric coming from the East, from China, is powerful. They're smart people, and they know how to appeal to Western civilization. All they got to do is say the buzzwords like free trade and global and, you know, all kinds of words.
They'll even throw capitalist in there sometimes. Well, I think we talked about some good issues. Any final thoughts?
I just would encourage people who haven't taken this issue seriously. Like, I didn't originally take this very seriously until I started looking up the words in the dictionary and researching what other people were saying about it. But I think globalism is an important topic. And if you're not familiar with it, go to the dictionary, look up the word in older dictionaries and see how the concept has changed over time. Even if you just Google it, you'll see that Google recognizes that the concept has changed from 1940 to now. They injected the word free trade into the idea. It wasn't originally in the idea. Originally, it was just about intervening in global affairs, like thinking that your nation has an interest in global affairs and getting involved, like with World War II. But now it's about free trade and capitalism. And I think that's what the communists got their hands on the concept, and now they're spoiling it, and they're ruining it. And they're trying to destroy the idea of free trade. So I would just be aware of that. Just educate yourself and learn what this issue is all about.
Great. Well, yeah, we're open in the comments for any feedback. We look forward to what you have to say. I just, you know, don't want, I would rather actually fight attempts at global governance than police others on just not using the term to save the day. So again, I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. This is the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we will see you next time.